So welcome to the last in our three-part series on making your digital life safer and easier. Come on in, absolutely. We're just getting started. So this session is about secure browsing. So we're going to talk kind of the same sort of format that we have for the other sessions. Think a little bit about what your needs are, and then think about some different ways that you could address those needs to make sure that you're browsing securely. So we'll start with who we are.
I'm Jonathan Bradley. I'm Head of Studios and Innovative Technologies here at the University Libraries.
And I'm Kayla McNabb, Head of Instructional Content Design for the University Libraries. And we're doing this as part of the Digital Literacy Initiative here at the library. So,
You want to tell them about the YubiKey before we go on?
Yes, yeah. So, so if you've attended all three sessions, then we will have you fill out a brief survey, give us some information about basically how you have or plan to put into action the things that we've talked about in these sessions. And then you will get a free YubiKey that is yours to keep. So we will talk a little bit more about that in the next steps at the end, but the survey for that will be going out within the next couple days, and that will have more detailed instructions for how you pick it up and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we have this quote. We're concerned that people are trading security for convenience. People are doing things on free Wi-Fi that are really alarming, which is sort of what we're getting into today.
Yeah. So Doug Chodell is a security expert, and lots of different things are being done on free Wi-Fi that maybe shouldn't be. So we'll talk about that. A bit of an overview. We'll do kind of an activity to help you assess your needs. We'll go through and talk a little bit about different types of data gathering and how that impacts the sorts of decisions you want to make. We'll talk about trusted networks and networking. Then we'll talk about browser-related security specifically. So once you're on a network that you trust, how do you actually go out into the internet? Talk about obscuring your traffic and when and how you might want to do that. And then trust and companies. So in each of these sessions, we've had a little bit of a broader kind of pushing the boundaries sort of topic. And this is one that we've come back to again and again throughout these. The companies that you do business with matter a lot. And whether or not you trust them and you can trust them is something you should be considering as you make these decisions. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll go on to next steps, how you can implement the stuff that we talk about today, and what the next steps are for getting that YubiKey if you've attended all the sessions, or when the next time is you might be able to attend sessions if you missed them. Mm-hmm. So, a lot to get through. Like each time, accessing the slides is at a bit.ly, and that bit.ly address will be in the upper corner throughout all of the slides as well. So if you want to pull that and go through it with us or return to it later, you can certainly do so. We'll also have a recording of the session that will be available after the session as well. So, place to start. Performing a bit of a risk assessment. So these are some questions for you to think about. What are you trying to keep private? From whom are you trying to keep it private? Is it people in your immediate circle? Is it an organization broader than that? Is it a government or even a broader entity? What are the consequences if that protection fails? So what is really put at risk if this is not private information anymore? And do those consequences change over time? So the longer you're at risk or the more information is out there, do those consequences change? So an important topic to think about in connection to these questions is the topic of relational security. So you may answer these questions about yourself and say, well, there's not really a lot of data about me or really information about me that I think would put me at risk. But you may be interacting with folks, you may be sending messages to folks or emails to folks who would be in a situation where they would be put at risk if information about them was made available. So particularly thinking about individuals who are part of protected groups or folks who maybe they use a different preferred name when they're on campus than they do at home, and they don't want those things to be shared. So thinking about from very fundamental things to really big secrets that you don't want shared is really important, particularly with the folks that you talk with. Could you be putting others at risk by having lax security practices?
Yeah. It's really hard to know what these things are, too. Unless the person has explicitly told you, which people don't necessarily do, you may not know that this is something that they don't want out there. And when your security is lax, you also put the people around you at risk, which is a concern.
So something to keep in mind as we think about this risk assessment. So there are different levels of security for different activities, different information, different risk levels. So considering them on a sliding scale. So we've had kind of a sliding scale for each of the different pieces that we've talked about so far, and our sliding scale has gotten a little bit different. So on the far left side, least risky, standard browser on open public wireless network to Tor browser over secure trusted wired network as being kind of our scale. Basically, don't do this. Don't send anything over an unsecured connection on an entirely open wireless network that you are unfamiliar with.
Chances are you would probably be fine, but there is some risk and it's not minimal. So
yeah,
we'll get into the details of that. Right.
So in some of the previous sessions, a lot of times, you may think things on this end, it's not going to affect many things, not going to have a big impact in my life. So maybe that all recipes password is not the most difficult password to break. But in this case, just stay away from this. Use some level of security, no matter what it is. So dig into the types of data that we're trying to protect against being gathered. So there are 3 types of data that we're going to talk about. So provided is the data that you give a platform. So when you sign up for a platform, it's what you explicitly tell them or explicitly tell them they can take.
So like a form, name, email address, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, your kind of standard information. Then there's extracted data. So this is data that's taken during your use of the platform. So when you're on Facebook and you go and like different things, and then it tracks what order you like those things in, that is extracted data. That's data that you may be able to limit. So you may be able to go into the platform settings and limit how much of that they can collect about you, but you're not explicitly giving it to them.
A good way to think about this is like Google Analytics. So you didn't tell, Google Analytics your IP address, but it can gather that information. You didn't tell Google Analytics what your zip code is, but it can extract that information. So there's that sort of information that just being there using a service is provided.
Yes. So the third level is inferred. And inferred data is data that you typically don't have any control over. It's very difficult for you to limit a company's ability to collect this about you unless you use secure browsing practices. And this is data that is very valuable about you. So this is a great example of this that we've talked about before, is the young woman who started getting baby coupons from Target because her purchasing history lined up with other women who within the 6 months or so after that started buying preparatory baby items and then diapers. So based on the inferred data about her, Target said, well, probably you're going to need to start buying baby clothes. And that can make you feel gross. These companies are...
it was also that she hadn't told her parents she was pregnant yet. And her dad got a bunch of these coupons in the mail and was like, what's going on here? Why are we getting these? And so something about her that she wasn't ready to tell her parents was told to them by a company.
Right. And in that case, because you were using she was using the same credit card information as the rest of her family. So thinking about that kind of data and how we could make it more difficult for folks to collect that sort of inferred data about us.
Yeah.
I think we're going to do.
And this third type of data is heavily tied to the ideas of big data and AI. That is generally how inferred data is created and used, is they throw you into a giant pile with thousands of other customers. They run these scans, these algorithms and stuff, and it pops out and says, this person's probably pregnant, given their background. And so inferred data is becoming more and more common as the ability to have large sets of data and run algorithms and run AI against them is becoming more cost efficient.
So why do companies collect this data? So improving the effectiveness of their services, definitely part of it, making decisions about what you should or might want to access, kind of predicting what it thinks your needs are going to be.
And this is often called telemetry. So sometimes you'll see like, we are using telemetry services. There's still a concern, even though they seem harmless on the surface, and we'll talk about why.
And then they also sell that information to advertisers to make money, to better advertise things to you and sell you things. Governments, local and foreign, also collect your data to monitor activity and to develop strategies to influence the public. So an example that came out just last week was some folks who were working at Twitter to collect information about people who are openly dissenting with Saudi Arabia and sharing information about those users of Twitter with that government in order for them to be aware and monitor the activity of folks who had dissenting opinions.
They were also sharing geolocations for the individuals with the Saudi government, which is scary and concerning on a lot of levels.
So that's kind of with those two. And then a broader overall example is the Edward Snowden links.
Yeah, so Edward Snowden revealed information publicly that the US government was mass surveilling, collecting data on the American people in order to influence and control the American people. And he was eventually branded a traitor and run out of the country and stuff. But that sort of thing's going on, and it was definitively proven that, and it was also shown that it was not just like the NSA doing this alone. They had deals with many major corporations in this process to do this. And to a certain degree, the government has the ability to sort of force their hand with a lot of that stuff. But in many of those situations, the companies were not adverse to doing that. They already had the data anyways, and it was just a way to garner favor with the government that could ultimately sort of benefit them, yes.
So, why is this a problem? This type of data can be dangerous, like we talked about. So, if in the wrong hands, there are a lot of different types of kind of malicious things that can be done with it. So, on a scale of targeted advertising to you, maybe being the most benign, to cyber attacks being the most malicious, that sort of data that we were just talking about could be used for anything on this spectrum. Do you want to talk a little bit more about government surveillance and corporate manipulation?
So,
the gray middle part.
The gray area and the cyber attacks, the government surveillance and the corporate manipulation, I mean, there's the Cambridge Analytica leaks. Facebook was very much trying to influence the American public towards certain political beliefs, and has shown no remorse about doing that and seemed to continue to do that. Same thing with the government surveillance. There is a great deal of that happening with face detection. There was a thing that came out just recently where some people had uncovered that within like K through 12 public schools, there were secret cameras that were doing face detection among students. And there are some groups currently fighting that. The cyber attacks thing, this sort of data gathering is one of the primary feeds for people to do like social engineering and stuff. They gather, Facebook or whatever has a database, figures out that you have a cat and you had a kid 6 months ago or whatever, and like all this information about you, someone gets access to that. They have that information about you now. And then they call up some account that you have and they say, oh, like, I just had a kid recently, or try to call members of your family on your behalf. They can use that information to try to manipulate a situation into getting access to things that they shouldn't normally have access to. And it works a lot better than you would expect. People have a tendency to almost immediately trust someone who seems to have knowledge that we would assume they shouldn't have, but honestly is very common, and much of it's like public information. But in this situation, this isn't even public information necessarily that they're garnering from these. So it is a concern for your cyber safety as well.
Yeah. So this sort of data directly connects to the good passwords, some of the things we talked about in the good passwords class, and some of the things we talked about in implementing multi-factor authentication to make it harder for someone to use social engineering to be able to access additional things about you and additional accounts. So kind of keeping this sort of scale in mind is one thing that we'd like you to do as we talk about this. So, so are you being tracked?
Spoiler, yes. Yes, you are.
Yes. So, yep, that's definitely happening. If you go to panopticlick.eff.org, you can see a little bit about the tracking that is currently in your browser. So I need to turn.
All of your privacy
I need to
stuff.
turn all my things off.
You just let them do it, because you're gonna have to turn off way too much stuff to get it to run the test in your browser.
So if you click test me, it'll let you know if you're. I bet there's still probably something. So it'll run. I would definitely encourage you to go to Panopticlick in your browser and see what's currently tracking you. It does. I don't currently have it enabled to block third parties that promise to honor do not track, and my browser is not protected against fingerprinting, which is. Do you want to talk about fingerprinting a little bit?
No,
that's
too complicated. Let's go back to slides.
So it's
That's its own topic.
Yeah, someone would be able to tell that it is the same person across. And then so tracking in action, if you look, I can go to Virginia Tech's website and we can use.
So we picked Virginia Tech's website, one, because it's relevant to everybody here, but also because this is like a safe site in the sense that, like, we're an academic institution, we're not a company. In general, academic institutions are known for things like freedom of thought and stuff like that. But if Kayla runs her Ghost Tree thing, she'll bring it up here in a second, you'll see that you are being tracked, and we can go down through here and you can see so some things like Facebook, because we have, the university has Facebook integration for their social media and everything on there. So it's tracking you via Virginia Tech site. It's Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, which are sort of standard analytics data gathering stuff. There's a couple other social media related things. And there's also Kaltura, which is the university's video platform. So one of the things to point out is, like, even in this situation, like, is Virginia Tech doing this tracking? No. But the natural integration of a modern web page often means other people have their hooks in and are doing that sort of data gathering and data tracking, even on a site that's, for the most part, you should consider trustworthy. So, I mean, now picture what this might be like on a corporation site who has no reason to care about your privacy and probably actively is trying to gather as much information about you as possible. It can be a very stark difference. But even on sites that you might think are safe, you're still likely being tracked.
So that's a plugin for. It's available for Chrome and Firefox, and we'll talk about several of those examples later. But they just sit up here in your browser, and you can enable them.
Plugins are an interesting gray area. In some cases, they can be very good, but you should always be very mindful anytime you install a plugin, who made it, where it came from. If at all possible, always install one that has like open source code, so there's people out there who can verify that it's doing the thing it says, versus some sort of closed source thing that you have no idea what it's actually might be doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, so what can we do about this? Even if sites, as close to us as Virginia Tech's homepage, are tracking us in different ways, what can we do about it? So you can secure your network and your browser. And we're going to tell you different ways that you can do that. First, we'll talk about networks.
We'll talk about securing your network. So this is away. This is from when you're away from home, you're out in the world. These are some things to do. This one's going to seem laughable to many people because nobody uses these anymore, but don't use unfamiliar Ethernet ports. Still, there's a ton of Ethernet ports around here, and every now and then students are like, oh, my Wi-Fi is weird. Here's a port. Go grab a cable from somewhere and just plug it in. Don't do that. There used to be people who just put data miners on the end of it, and they just run a cord out to some seat or something, and people would see it, plug it in their computer, and everything they were doing was getting run through these devices. Huh? I would be careful in hotel rooms. You know, the hotel you would think would come and check the rooms and stuff afterwards, but that's putting your security in the hands of other people. Also, in general, hotel networks are drastically insecure, just since we're on that topic. There's a great video you can watch. It's a TED Talk by a guy who does, he does some sort of white hat hacking about what he was doing in a hotel room. Basically, he got to the point where he could go see what everybody was watching, what they were buying on their pay-per-view and stuff across an entire hotel network, and it took him about like 3 minutes to do it. Don't do anything important on a hotel network, which if you are going to, we'll talk about some ways to handle that. But open wireless networks, try to avoid them if possible. It's not completely possible. If you do not expect a wireless network here, definitely do not connect to it. If you're at somewhere and you see one for Panera Bread, you're not at Panera Bread. Don't join the Panera Bread network, even though you join it all the time. You know it's good free Wi-Fi or whatever. It can be very hard to distinguish Wi-Fi networks and whether they're true or not. So the little name that comes on a Wi-Fi network is called an SSID. It is no effort whatsoever to throw up an SSID and have it be whatever word you want. And so if we're sitting at Panera Bread, I can just as easily throw up a Wi-Fi network and say, this is Panera Bread or whatever theirs is. And so you have to be careful. You have to be mindful. A lot of businesses that run open Wi-Fi networks have some sort of portal. People can also mimic those portals as well. And so there are concerns about that. So be very careful. If at all possible, try to use some sort of authentication-based Wi-Fi network. Avoid entering credentials on a site when you're on an unsecured wireless network. So, you know, open it up, browse the internet, and don't log into anything. Probably not a big deal. Avoid logging into anything, particularly anything important. For the most part, if the site is using HTTPS, then you're probably all right. It should go through and it should be encrypted and people shouldn't be able to see what you're doing. Problem is, one, you have to check, and Google and Firefox have purposely stopped showing you the big green bar in the top left-hand corner because people, the lock, yeah, because people were relying on it too much as terms of safety when that alone is not a marker that this is a site that is safe. It just marks that your connection's encrypted. You can have an encrypted connection to a malicious site as well. The other side of things is people can throw up fake websites that look like the ones you're trying to go to if they're doing something where they're intercepting your signal, if you connect to their Wi-Fi network. So you might type in that you're going to Google, and they might show you a page that looks like Google, but it might not actually be Google. It might just be a page they made look like Google, and you're there and you're typing in all your credentials and stuff onto that page, and they're intercepting them at the same time. So be very mindful of that.
So one thing that connects back to from the passwords class is if you're using a password manager that identifies a URL, it's not going to suggest your passwords for that URL.
And if you're using a YubiKey, they will not be able to steal your account even if they have your password and you input the code from your YubiKey because it will be encrypted wrong.
So some things to think about how it all fits together.
Yep.
So that's when you're away from home. So what about when you're at home?
So when you're at home, your own wireless network that you have in your home, don't leave your wireless network unsecured. If you don't have a password on your wireless network, do it. It is very bad. It is very easy on an open wireless network to compromise some other device on that network and have all of your data, all of your information, everything be feeding out to a central server. Don't use WEP. WEP was a way of encrypting your wireless signal, quote unquote, securing it with a password. It was cracked years ago at this point, and is basically now people can crack even a complex long password on a web network in like 7 seconds. It takes no time. And you'll know you're using WEP if it has one of those push button to connect features where there's like a little button on your router and you push it and then you tell your phone like just find the network. That was one of the features of WEP, and that was part of its downfall ultimately. So avoid using WEP, just turn it off. Use a good password for your network. Wi-Fi networks are easy to brute force because you can just sit outside and just start trying passwords against it.
So like your address, it's not a good password.
It's not a good password. It's also the sort of situation where a lot of routers don't do a lot for like rate limiting and things that would normally try to prevent brute force attacks. So you need a good password. Change the password for your router. So this one's going to seem confusing. So if you got a router from your ISP or you bought one, that router, you may have never actually really touched it. It just somebody came and they set it up for you and put it in your house and then you were just using it. That router itself has a password on it. By 95% of the time, the password on this is either no password whatsoever and you just hit log me in, or the password's like admin or password. They take no time to get in there, and people can go in there and they can basically forward all your traffic to wherever they want it to go for that. So either ask the person who set it up to change your Wi-Fi or your router password, or you can look at what your router is and there's a guide online that'll show you how to change that password.
An attendee asked, someone would still need to be nearby to access your Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah. So they would have to be in range of the Wi-Fi to really get at your network. But
Much bigger problem in like an apartment complex.
it is a much bigger problem in an apartment complex. I'd still secure it, but it's not a bad idea. It's always the sort of thing we talk about this. We've talked about in the other sessions. You're running away from a bear. You don't have to really outrun the bear. You just have to run faster than all the other people. You just have to make yourself a harder target than the easy targets, and preferably we'd all be very difficult targets and the bear would just go hungry, but in the grand scheme of things and from a realistic point of view, just be a difficult target. Yeah.
All right.
And so this one is, so all your routers are generally going to come in with a firewall on them that's going to prevent just people coming into your private network. There are ports on there that get forwarded for things. In general, most of the time you have to manually do this. If you have an old router, they used to have a feature about plug and play in which certain devices could open ports automatically on there. A lot of those devices weren't set up very well. It was a lot of problems with our security. They would leave those ports open, and then hackers can just do a port scan against your entire setup, find openings essentially in your firewall and get in. If you have an old router, then you might want to go in and check it and maybe reset it, and especially try to get rid of some of those old devices, especially things you might have taken off your network years ago. But you might want to consider upgrading your router. If you do actually go in and forward ports, be very mindful of what you're forwarding and why. And then finally, upgrade to WPA3 as soon as possible. So most Wi-Fis are secured. Whenever you go to set up your password, you'll sign up for WPA2, which is what it's listed as right now. There is evidence that WPA2 has been theoretically cracked, and there are some people claiming, although it hasn't been verified, that they have cracked it in actual application. There is a new series of Wi-Fi coming out. You'll see it start getting branded on a lot of devices, Wi-Fi 6. It'll be on all your cell phones and laptops and all that sort of thing. Wi-Fi 6 routers have a new encryption method called WPA3, which is much more secure and fixes a lot of potential future problems in the encryption method that exists. And so it's a good idea. That one's not necessarily like a big concern right now, but as you maybe get a new router or you start getting new devices, be thinking about those upgrades and moving over to WPA3. The moment you have a router that supports WPA3, go ahead and start using it over WPA2, essentially. Instead, yes.
Yeah. So we've talked about networks, right? So now you're connected to a secure network. You feel good about it. You feel safe. But what about in your browser? So browser plugins. So we looked at Ghostery. So these work in your browser to prevent that unwanted tracking behavior. A lot of times they will alert you to what types and how many different types of tracking you have there. You can allow specific domains. Sometimes by blocking tracking, you break functionality within a website because it's tied into the way that that part of the site works. So you may want to enable just specific parts of it. A lot of these browser plugins will allow you to go through and make those selections. Ads are also blocked sometimes because they can also be malicious.
Time for a short rant about ads. So you'll see a lot of sites that are like, hey, we're ad supported, you should unblock us, and they try to make you feel guilty about it. And that's fair. That's how they make their business model and their money. But currently, most companies get their ads from these large ad groups that just have servers, and they just start dealing out ads as their algorithms see fit. And the company has very little, if no, control over what ads are actually displayed. Many of these servers have been compromised in the past to serve malware, and many of them also serve ads for things that are just not great in general, and they do a lot of tracking by them. And so, yes, ads are how some sites make their money. You do not have to, and you should never feel like you have to put yourself at risk for malware in order to support that site. If you really like a site and you want to support them, most sites have some sort of donation page or Patreon or something along those lines that you can give money to them to. There's no need to feel guilty and then ultimately end up with a virus on your computer because you let a bunch of ads through from some site that the people running the site have no idea what it's going to let through. And in this situation, I will give a little bit of kudos to Google in the situation. I mean, ads are their thing, but Google has moved to text-only ads. You can't throw images, you can't throw videos. They're actually some of the more secure ads that exist on the internet. So Google is the big sort of evil face of ads on the internet, but they actually are taking some good steps compared to a lot of the other ad companies that exist.
So you want to make sure that you trust the company that's making this plugin before you install it. So like we talked about before, we're going to talk even more about companies and choosing which ones you trust. But there are a few of the suggestions that we have for browser plugins are from the EFF, the
Electronic Freedom Frontier.
Yes.
Who care more about your internet security than you ever will.
Yes, they're very fervent supporters of free and open internet.
I've donated money to them in the past, and so I get all their newsletters and stuff. They care a lot about your security, even if you don't even know who they are.
And they these plugins and a lot of their applications are entirely open.
Yes.
So they are easy for folks to go in and audit and make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing. So
yeah, the EFF is like the extreme, like secure. Everybody should have the right to privacy. Everybody should have the right to their data. They care a lot about that. So a great counterexample to this is AdBlock. So a while back, there used to be a browser plugin that everybody thought was great called AdBlock, sometimes called AdBlock Plus. And then the person who made the plugin made a deal with ad companies that they could pay him money and he would let their ads through AdBlock as the plugin. So now the ad block is dead and everybody uses the different plugins now. But yeah, so, you know, you got to realize a lot of the stuff's still just being made by people and people can be swayed by money. And so you're always sort of relying on those sorts of things.
right. So what are some good browser plugins?
Currently good browser
So,
plugins.
right, currently, as of right now, could always change. Definitely, if you, depending on what you choose and what you choose to implement after this workshop, I would keep an eye out for those things specifically in the news.
Yeah.
Right.
This is why I usually emphasize using plugins that have an open source code and preferably ones that are worked on by groups of people who believe in the software. Those are generally the most secure, because if one person tries to say, it's hard to compromise a lot of disjointed people who are just working on this because they care, versus like one person who's maintaining this code base and starts to say like, this is a lot of my time and I deserve to be compensated for this. And so if like one person tries to add in some sort of subversive code, the other people see it in the repository and whoever's maintaining it says, well, here's a pull request, but we're not accepting this because this is a problem.
So for ad blocking, uBlock Origin, which is available for Chrome and Firefox. That's one of the top for ad blocking. Anti-tracking, Privacy Badger, which is created by the EFF and is available for all major browsers at this point, I do believe. Ghostery,
which is the plugin that she used earlier on Virginia Tech's site.
yes, I believe is also available for all major browsers. And then for connecting securely, HTTPS everywhere. This is also made by the EFF. And what does it do?
So whenever you go to a new site, it checks to see if you go to a non-encrypted version of a site, it checks to see if there is an encrypted version of that site available. And if there is, it will automatically move you to the encrypted version of the site, so that you are, whenever possible, always going over an encrypted connection versus an unencrypted one. Because secure encrypted connections are becoming far easier and more accessible for people to do. There are still a lot of sites that have both available, an encrypted and encrypted connection, and this basically tries to ensure that when you're not paying attention, you always end up on the encrypted version.
So, as you look at other browser plugins and things, I would definitely encourage you, a lot of times you'll do searches, you'll find lists of like the best browser plugins for X thing. Make sure that when you're looking at those lists that they are not sponsored by one of those companies that they're recommending. There are particularly the EFF, but there are also some other organizations that when you go out, you see more of a balanced look at what's out there. So this is a good place to start. And so what about your browser? There is, it's gotten better, right, over the last 5-10 years, but some browsers definitely take security more seriously than others. And there are settings baked into many browsers that you can go in your standard settings and update your privacy. And definitely at least do that. But you also want to think about why browsers may want to track you. So how are they going to benefit from having that data? Telemetry, we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so a while back, there's a setting in Google Chrome that you could turn off, and you say, don't send this data to Google. And people found out that Google was still getting that data, and they dug into it, and they figured out it was actually being sent as part of the, like, we need your anonymous usage data. And Google was like, oh, sorry, we didn't know that was happening, which is usually Google's response. They did the same thing with like the Google Maps. They were collecting public Wi-Fi information from the cars that drive around the country. And they responded like, oh, we weren't doing that on purpose. It was just happening. And somebody was like, to do that, it would be like terabytes upon terabytes of data that would have to be stored on the car itself. You did this purposely. Like, it would be impossible to accidentally collect millions and millions of like pieces of information about it. So telemetry data, a lot of companies will, because they know most people are like, oh, okay, it's anonymous usage, it's just supposed to improve your service. They'll say yes to that box. And so some companies are starting to get a little sketchy with what they include in that information.
So keep that in mind. And this sort of data that covers all of the different aspects of your browsing is very valuable. They can get a lot out of that. So we don't want them to have that necessarily. So how can you address the issue? Trusted browsers is one way to go, and we'll talk about some of those. Using good digital hygiene. So this means what we have up here, fragmenting your footprint. So maybe you use certain browsers for certain types of activities. Maybe you only log in to money-related things in Safari, and maybe you only log into purchasing related things in this other browser, and you don't log into anything on Chrome. You know, you fragment your footprint, so it's harder to track you. So separate that activity based on activity or purpose. And so some examples.
A quick interjection here to reiterate that it's very important to keep up with what the current recommendations are. Since this workshop was recorded, We've uncovered some information about the Brave browser that would lead us to not recommend that as an option. So just a reminder that you should be following up with these things and checking on them in the news, whatever platform you decide to use.
So there are Chromium-based browsers, which is the platform upon which Chrome is based.
There's an open source project that Google built Chrome out of called Chromium.
So in these browsers, you would be able to use plugins that work with Chrome. So Brave and ungoogled Chromium are two that are generally fairly well respected at this point. For Firefox based, if you prefer Firefox, these also work with Firefox plugins. Firefox Quantum is the new updated standard Firefox. They, over the last couple of years, have started to really put security at the forefront of kind of what they say that they're offering. And a lot of folks within the community are respecting that. The GNU IceCat and WaterFox are two others that are open source and are Firefox based. And then for mobile, DuckDuckGo, Brave, Firefox Focus, these are browsers that are kind of by default a privacy window. And then within Brave, you can have a private window within that private window. So depending on your usage and what you prefer, maybe try a couple out. Tor browser, we're going to get into in the Tor section, but it is available for desktop and mobile, and is a really good option for very much obfuscating what you're doing, making that more difficult to track. Pi-hole.
So a Pi-hole, we'll go through this one fairly quickly. A Pi-hole is a little device you can install an operating system on a Raspberry Pi, so a little $35 microcomputer, and you can plug it up to your home network, and it will actually block all advertisements across your entire network. So even in things that might not be able, not in a browser window, like if you have smart TV or smart devices around your home that would download ads, and it blocks them by preventing you from ever reaching out to the server to begin with. So not only is it not downloading them potentially, it's not ever, the servers aren't ever actually even getting the request that you want to view ads. And so they intercept your DNS request. So basically, whenever your computer says, hey, I'm looking for ads.google.com, your Pi-hole intercepts that request and says ads.google.com, that's an ad server. I'm just going to drop this request into the void, which they call the Pi-hole. And it's never going to go anywhere. It's never going to leave your network, and you're never going to get that request back from them. So they're never downloaded to begin with. And there is, you can buy a little Raspberry Pi. There's an operating system. They have a little guide on their website for setting it up. You just install it on there, and then basically like you plug it into your network into one of your open Ethernet ports. And then you tell your router that this is your new DNS, and it will do it. A fairly little bit of a learning curve to it, but it can be very nice for your home network and not having to worry about ads for anything that you're doing there.
So some other options for obscuring your traffic. So probably one of the easiest to implement is a virtual private network, or a VPN.
Yeah, so VPN, normally when you make a request out the internet, you say, hey, I'm so-and-so and I want to get this website. When you use a VPN instead, what happens is you make a connection to a server that's outside on the internet somewhere. It's encrypted, so you make a request to that server, you tell it what you want, and it goes out on your behalf and makes that request, and then it sends it back to you encrypted as well. So it makes it very difficult for, one, it makes it difficult for anything to intercept your connection because your connection is directly with that server. So it's generally the way that we recommend if you are going to be using open Wi-Fi networks that you use one. It just adds a level of security to that connection, and you can worry a little bit less about it. It's also the sort of thing that will help you figure out if you're on a fake Wi-Fi network, because a lot of times your connection to your VPN will fail, and you'll be like, that's concerning. Why is that happening? And you might want to look into it more. And so in this situation, you do have to trust the company that is running the server for you, that they have your best interests in mind. And so it does add a little bit of sort of transport time because it encrypts everything. So your packets are heavier. So it will slow your internet connection down slightly, but not too much depending on what you're doing. And finally, it also protects your traffic from your internet service providers. And if you think you don't need to do that, you're wrong. You do need to protect your internet traffic from your internet service providers. Ever since net neutrality was sort of killed in the FCC, internet service providers are free to throttle your internet. So if they see you using a competing service, they can say, we don't want you using iTunes for your music. We want you using this whatever Comcast sponsored music service. So we're gonna make iTunes really slow and really crappy and make our service extremely fast so that you're more likely to use our service. So I could go on a long rant about net neutrality, but I won't do that now. You can also bypass censorship in region-locked countries because your traffic appears to be originating from the place that the VPN server is located. So if you have access to a VPN network from a service provider or something like that, you can say, well, I want to come out in a different country where there's not a firewall. And a lot of countries with large government-run censorship operations use VPNs in order to access the external internet. Region lock content, we are not advocating overcoming region lock content, but it is a way to do it. So if someone says, you can't watch something here in this country, then you can use VPN and make it appear as though you're from a different country.
That is a thing you can do. So Jonathan talked a little bit about the drawbacks, right? So it does slow down your internet connection some. Depends on what you're doing, depends on where you're connecting through. There are lots of factors there. It can be a
like if you're streaming video, it's gonna slow your connection down a good bit. If you're just like browsing and looking at pages on the internet, probably not.
And trusting your service provider, whether or not they are keeping logs.
Right. So if there are a handful of these VPN providers that have been proven to be true to their word that they do not keep logs on internet traffic. They've been proven this because they got subpoenas from the U.S. government and they were able to legally respond. We cannot provide this information. It does not exist. Others have been subpoenaed and their responses were, oh yeah, we found that data. We didn't think we were keeping it, but it turns out we did. Because they were actually keeping the logs anyways and they weren't being true to their word and a bad business model. But
so some examples. So for Virginia Tech related access. So especially if you have systems that you're accessing from Virginia Tech, Pulse Secure is the VPN that they provide for us to use for that. For your own use and for personal use, private internet access and TunnelBear are two that are currently very well respected within the field, but there are several others.
Yeah. Always, there's a lot of sites where you can do comparisons and deep dives into VPN service, including cost. And if they don't charge you, be very concerned. Yes. Because.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it's, it's not a crazy fee, but one thing we'll talk about more here in a few moments is if you're not paying with money, you're paying with something else, and be mindful of what that might be. So, Tor.
So how does it work? So when Tor has a series of nodes set up across the internet. These are actually often set up in libraries, but other public menus. And essentially your computer, when you're using Tor, encrypts a path to your destination that you're going to go. And it encrypts it in layers. And then it sends it to each individual stop along the way. And each individual stop can decrypt a layer of it. And so they're all required in order to get actually to the end of the line. But no one node knows where it originated from and where it will end. So the Tor actually stands for the onion router, and they use that as a metaphor for the way that this layered encryption works. And so it's very good for, like, the end node is going to know where you're going, and the first node is going to know who you were. But the first node doesn't know where you're going, and the last node doesn't know where it started. And every node in between has no idea where, it knows where it came from and where it's going, and that's about it. And so it does this sort of, let's decrypt each portion of it along its way. And so it's very good for making it hard to track traffic back to any singular person. I see this getting used a lot in modern day with journalists who are working with sources. They will have their sources go through Tor to drop off confidential and important information that could be dangerous for the source if it were to be released, that this is the person who leaked this or did this sort of thing. But there are also a lot of other reasons why you might, and Electronic Freedom Frontier, who supports and works on Tor, also has like a list of all the potential uses for Tor. And it's been, it's gotten a lot of criticism in the past because it is also essentially your gateway into the dark web, and a lot of sites that are only accessible via Tor and things that are called onion addresses. They're web addresses that do not have, you can't go to them on a normal browser. You can only get to them by following a Tor network set of nodes and knowing the onion address, and you can go find like lists of onion addresses and stuff. But there are very many legitimate uses of Tor that the Electronic Freedom Frontier is trying to get in people's heads, because they're like, people only hear about Tor when it's in relation to some terrible thing, some giant drug empire that was being being run through the internet sort of thing.
Yeah, so things like domestic violence. So if you know someone who may need to do research about how to get out of a domestic violence situation, this is a way that it would be impossible for someone to track that research back to them. And it doesn't keep the same sorts of logs and things like that, that someone might be able to go into their browser and look at their browser history if they're in that sort of relationship. So lots of practical, other practical reasons that you might want to do this. So how do you set it up? There is Tor browser, which you can go to torproject.org and download that. So it's available for desktop and mobile. There used to be a way to set up a Tor router. It's complicated and they don't recommend it anymore.
Yeah, it used to be much more complicated to get on a Tor network, and now the browser works. It works fine. Just use that. And that's also part of their big push, is like, let's make this easier, more accessible, take away the like intricate technological knowledge required to use this service. DNS over HTTPS. So even if your connection is encrypted, your request, your DNS request, your domain name server request is not. So when you want to go to a site, say I want to go to Amazon.com, your computer doesn't know what Amazon.com is or where it is. It says, how do I get to Amazon.com? So it makes a request out to a domain name server, and it says, I'm looking for Amazon.com. And that domain name server responds, here's the IP address for the server. And then you actually go to that. Those requests are not encrypted. And so your ISP and other people on your network can see where you're actually going. And this is how a lot of ISPs do throttling. They say, oh, they're going to YouTube. I want to block that. I'm going to throttle that so that they go to my Comcast tube or whatever it is, sort of thing. So they use that sort of thing to block it. You can, however, encrypt your DNS requests, and it's becoming more common to do that. You do ultimately need to trust your end provider, who is running the DNS server. In a lot of cases, this is Google. The other major player in this is Cloudflare, who is a CDN, content delivery network company. But setting this up, there is a very complicated way that goes in and like setting a whole bunch of stuff up on your router. And then there is just an app that you can use called 11111. I recommend you do that instead than the more complicated approach. And it will set it up for you. And also, if you have an Android phone, Google does this by default for a lot of things if you're using your Android phone. If you want all the traffic on your entire network, then you have to go through the router and the much more complicated network setup.
So what about secure communication? So we've talked a lot about different aspects of how you connect to the internet, how you access the internet, how you're going to get online in the first place. But there are some secure communication options that we want to introduce to you, just kind of as a primer for you to think about. So messaging apps is one thing. Standard text messaging or messenger apps within other services like Facebook Messenger, historically have not been particularly well encrypted, so there are some options. So this is one that's for text, voice, and video that you might consider. Signal, and then Silence is for SMS and MMS. So these are options that will you can use maybe for standard Signal. You can use for standard MMS and SMS, or securely connect with people if you both have the app.
An attendee asked about WhatsApp.
They have started promoting it as a secure method, or they had, but I'm not caught up with it. No, have you heard anything about that?
I have questions
It's
about
owned
the.
by Facebook.
Yeah, that's
right?
why I don't recommend it, because I don't. Facebook has proven multiple times in the past that no matter what they say about not collecting or doing anything nefarious, they're lying. Like, I just don't trust Facebook. Like, there are companies in their gray areas, and we'll talk about this here in a second. And Facebook's one of those companies that I'm like, I don't know that I have any trust for really much of anything that you do. Versus other companies that are sort of these big evil faces of corporation, but there are certain things I would trust them to do. I don't have any trust for Facebook, so I don't follow WhatsApp. I wouldn't use it. I would not trust Facebook to keep it secure, or not come out in a couple months that they are secretly mining everything and decrypting it, or who knows what they're doing.
So another thing that you probably have typically gotten for free that maybe you would want to think about is email. So Proton Mail is just one of many examples. There's a link in the resources page where you can typically pay generally a nominal fee. Sometimes it can be more expensive for a email provider that's in usually a country that cares more about security and privacy than America does in general.
It's usually a Scandinavian country.
Right, or Germany.
Or
So
Germany.
there are several that are based out of those Scandinavian or European countries, and Proton Mail is one of those. And then thinking about sharing data or files. So Firefox Send is a way to send a file directly, or password managers. If you need to share like small like codes or passwords, you can share those directly within a password manager. So you don't have to put it in a text message. Please don't put it in a text message. So you don't have to send it over some sort of unsecured type of communication. Trust in companies. Sometimes you can trust a company.
Yeah,
Other times you can't.
So I wanted to emphasize this, since this is the third part of this, is that we go over a lot of companies and you'll hear us talk about them in differing ways. And it would be really nice if I could give you a list of companies and be like, just never trust these companies. I did sort of. I gave you Facebook as a list of one, maybe. I don't know. I could probably think of others. But it's very hard to do that. And because in some situations you can trust a company and others you can't. So when it comes to Google, if it was authentication, yeah, I would trust them, because they lose money when accounts are stolen. But if it's for browsing and your privacy for like your internet traffic and ads, no, I wouldn't trust them at all, because that's how they make their money. And so for a lot of these situations, you have to sort of look at a company and ask them, well, why are they doing this? And where are they making their money? And what are they getting from me? So we have this note up here, and this is, if you could take away one thing from this whole lesson, it would probably be this. You should always be suspicious of a free service, because people don't realize it, because it all seems like digital ones and zeros and this magical thing. But the cost of hosting a server, of paying developers, of maintaining these situations, paying for bandwidth and storage and all that sort of stuff is significant costs. No one can run a service like this for an extended period of time without incurring a huge amount of debt. And they have to pay that debt in some way if it's a continuing service. And so they have to have some means of making money. If they're not charging you directly for it, then they're making that money some other way. And that's probably by selling something you're giving them, or something they're taking away from you and you don't actually know it. And sometimes it's fair for you to say, I'm fine with that. We trade our certain parts of, like I use Gmail. I have a Gmail account. I've had it for decades now. I'm okay with Google looking at my emails, running their little algorithm and saying, oh, Jonathan would probably like this, whatever, this graphic novel or this comic book or something like that. I'm going to make this suggestion to him in ads. And maybe I buy it, maybe I don't. Like, that's fine by me. There are other things that I'm probably not okay with trading for some sort of free service. And so you just need to be aware of the fact that you're trading something and make a conscious decision that you're okay doing that. Otherwise, you need to look to something that you're actually going to have to pay for that service.
So that's a bummer.
It's a bummer to end on, yeah.
I'm gonna run through next steps and then we'll do questions since we're tight on time. But this is what we really want to leave you with. So think about our trusted network suggestions. What might you be able to implement in your own setup, or when you're out or traveling, how might you be able to be more secure in those settings? Your current browser, what you're using it for. Think about those things. Think about which of the options we've presented here or in the resources page, what you might be able to do to make that less transparent for somebody else. If Pi-holes or virtual private networks or Tor or DNS over HTTPS address needs that you have, think about what that might look like. Like I said, I think probably VPNs and the DNS over HTTPS are probably the easiest to implement, using a better browser is the bare minimum easiest to implement, I think. But they're also very inexpensive. So thinking about that. Secure communication, think about your needs as well as the needs of the folks that you communicate with that, and choose an option or options that meet that need. And then look at the companies that you currently have accounts with, particularly free accounts, and decide whether or not you trust them. And whether or not you trust them for what they're doing for you. And if that's something that might need to be changed to better meet your needs. For completing the series, if you haven't attended all 3 sessions and you're interested in doing so, check back calendar.lib.bq.edu. We'll be offering several more sessions in the spring, and we're doing 3 sessions essentially back to back on reading day. So if you know someone that you think would really benefit from all or part of this, definitely send them our way. And if you've completed all 3 sessions, then you're eligible to fill out the survey and receive your free YubiKey. And we would love more people to be using multi-factor authentication with a physical key. So you'll go to the URL that we send you, you'll complete the form, which basically tells us how you're going to use the information that we shared, or what you already do in those areas. And then you will get a confirmation email with directions on how to pick up your YubiKey from us. So, questions? We're a couple minutes over. I'm sorry. These are all links that you can access at the bit.ly to learn more about some of these things. The additional security lessons is a set of like actual full lessons from the EFF that they've developed for use in schools mostly.
Someone asked the question, so how do you disengage from companies you don't agree with?
It's definitely going to be a multi-step process.
So to a certain degree, you can ask them nicely to delete the information they have about you.
Yes.
Most of them won't. Like Facebook would be like, here's a button, you can delete your account and all the stuff associated with it. People found out that they could reinstate your account later. They never deleted it. And they're never going to. So, I mean, to a certain degree, you just got to come to terms with all the stuff you've currently given them. They're probably not going to let go. They're probably never going to let go. But that doesn't mean you can't stop giving them new things. I mean, find the alternative to that service and what that you're going to use from someone you trust. And I would say slowly start switching. Figure out if it's an email address, go and change your email address on any other important accounts that you have so that it points to the new one.
I would say even with that, like maybe you don't change everything away from your Gmail account, right? Maybe you change your important, like, banking and like things that are really critical to a new, more secure email, and you leave like your Old Navy account or whatever, linked to this place that it's been for 10 years. You might think about fragmenting more.
Yeah, the fragmentation also comes with a level of inconvenience that most people are not happy about. So it sort of comes down to what you're willing to do. Most people don't want to log into emails, and so it sort of comes down to, if you're fine, then you can leave all the spam companies or accounts you don't really care for, or the ones you made, to just add to like a single site or something, or make a single purchase against on an old account and put anything that you regularly use and that's important to you on a new account. But
Yeah, and things like the messaging, it does mean that you would have to have the people that you communicate with also agree to download this app, right? So that you have a secure connection across. So it is introducing some changes into the workflows of your advisory.
I mean, you can generally make that switch, and you can ask them to. Even if they don't, you can still use the app to communicate with them. It just won't be, that connection won't be secure. It'll only be secured with other people who are using a similar secured app.
An attendee asked if our school issued Gmail is any more secure than regular Gmail.
No, it's not. I mean, we have some modicum of control over the mail servers when they come in, but mail by its default is not a secure medium. People have a tendency to think it is, and that is a fairly big mistake that has sort of come back to bite people in the past. If you have something that is important and secure, that's why I always get really frustrated if you get those emails from people and it's like, this email is intended for the intended recipient, don't use, and I'm like, if you have to put this in the signature of your email, you should not be sending this thing via email. This is not a secure transform. Also, it's not legally binding in any way, shape, or form. So that's the other problem with it. But either way, like you shouldn't be sending things that are important and that you care about via email, because mail servers just aren't designed for that sort of thing.
An attendee asked about ransom emails, where an individual will include your current or previous password and threaten to expose that or other information.
So that ransom email is probably the same one I got. There's been a number of big breaches. There were some places that were found to be showing passwords in plain text. They were being posted online. So all those passwords, like if they send you that password, you need to change that password anywhere it exists, because it has 100% been compromised and is available on the internet in plain text associated with your email address. That being said, they're relying on people who just don't know tech to be scared and to send them money. And you got to realize in those situations, they are, one of those dumps is generally millions of people. And if they send out this blanket email to 200 million people, even a response rate of like 1% is a significant amount of money, even if you've demanded like $100 from any one of them. So it's a lucrative ploy. And honestly, like a lot of people probably never even opened that email. A lot of people looked at it and said, well, I don't care, it's not true. But then there's like this 1% of people who just buy it and are terrified of it and do whatever it asks. And so that's just what they're banking on. There's no real actual power there. And then much of the stuff that's in that email is a bunch of lies anyway.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. We will send out, thank you, the recording and the link for the survey.